let's move on to monetary side of the things. So given that from October last year, all retail and small business loans, they moved from MCLR framework to the new external benchmark based lending rate, which is mostly repo rate. So in almost all the banks did it. So what do you think will be the impact of CRR exemption on the lending rates?
That is that sector specific lending rates that is being announced this year. Are you saying that?
Government exempted CRR.
Now see, you have to look into a broader perspective of the monetary policy. The broader perspective of monetary policy, how monetary policy works, and you know that monetary policy works through cutting interest rate that will boost investment demand. Now, as I pointed out earlier, in the urban consumption, one of the major reasons why urban consumption demand is not picking up is because of the lingering effect of demonetization that because particularly in real estate sectors. And definitely there is some sort of a credit crunch. Because banks are correcting on their non-performing assets, which has been accumulating over the years. It is not that it has accumulated in last 2-3 years. It has accumulated over a period, over a decade, and the banks are correcting on its scenario. So banks are sitting on tight liquidity. Even if banks are not sitting on tight liquidity, banks are keeping something called excess reserves over and above the mandatory reserves, right? Which otherwise they could have lent out and could have boosted consumption and investment demand, in particular investment demand through cutting taxes. In spite of last 1.5 years, you are speaking of last 6 months, but prior to that, there has been some, how many? 4 or 5 cut in repo?
Yes, sir.
5 cuts in repo. These 5 cuts in repo has translated to some cut in interest rate in India, although not the interest rate cut that is desirable. India still operates on a higher interest rate regime compared to many advanced economies, and not even advanced, at the economies which are at the same level of India, BRICS nations. So in this case, it is very important to infuse liquidity into the banking sector. So CRR is one component which till now is being considered as something which is kept with the RBI and which is something which is a wasted money because the banks do not earn anything out of it, right? So if that CRR is being exempted, it is expected that it will going to give more liquidity to the banks, which in turn they can lend out and can boost fall in interest rate, boost investment. Having said that, 2 precautions. First is, if banks sit on the exempted money and keep it as a what is called excess reserves and do not lend out as much as is desirable in the economy, then problem will be back. And second, no matter how much you lower interest rate, let me be very clear on this thing, which I also tell you in the class, and let me again substantiate on it. No matter how much you lower interest rate, private investment will only going to pick up if consumption demand picks up. Because the theory says that investment is a negative function of interest rate, but there is a concept called ceteris paribus, other things remaining constant. And one of the other thing is, what is the consumption sentiment in the economy? If consumption sentiment falls, in spite of fall in interest rate, investment demand will not pick up. Best example was the decade lost in Japan from 1992 to 2002. Interest rate was nearly about nominal interest rate 0%, but Japan suffered from a decade of slowdown.
So continuing on from what you have said, a famous Mint columnist Vivek Kaul, he has recently said, and I quote, monetary policy is useless these days. Don't waste your time on it unless you make a living writing and talking about it. Like, as you also stressed on fiscal measures that need to be taken and not the monetary measures.
This is the problem with economic subject. Okay, that is why students always find it a little bit. I mean, what I should link it with the real world. See, if I consider what we call as a large open economy under pure flexible exchange rate as India is, then Mundell-Fleming model says, I quote theory, what it says is that monetary policy is always more effective than fiscal policy. Because monetary policy will going to stimulate the economy through two channels. One is cut in interest rate, stimulate investment and GDP. The other is cut in interest rate, will means that it will going to have in terms of capital outflow will happen from your country. As capital outflow happens from your country, what will happen? Rupee will depreciate, net export will be stimulated, GDP will be stimulated. This is what theory says. But all this theory is based on the assumption of ceteris paribus. Okay, and then as soon as the ceteris paribus rule is violated, entire things go haywire. So that's the basic problem with this monetary policy. And what is being pointed out, I fully agree. At this stage, the monetary policy's main objective should be to ensure that at least inflation is under control. Having tried for the last 1.5 years to go for the repo cut, right? What has resulted in now in India, what we are moving towards is sort of a high inflation regime with not growth picking up. Right? So the role of monetary policy at this stage, if you ask me, it is not useless. I should not say the word useless. Useless so far as growth recovery is concerned, but very much important if you have to keep inflation under control. So I should personally believe a so-called completely neutral central bank should now move from an accommodative stance to a neutral stance. Although the RBI has not cut the interest rate, but its stance in monetary policy is still accommodative. It should move from accommodative stance to a neutral stance. And people start then anticipating that RBI is serious enough to control inflation and inflation can be controlled. But yes, so far as growth part is concerned, you are correct that monetary policy is not very at this stage effective, because monetary policy will only work through cutting interest rate that will boost investment. But at this stage, we need policy to boost consumption.